we received the script, which was pretty much the shooting script for Alien Resurrection. There was not a whole lot of changes, some sort of set piece changes and things like that, but pretty much the script that we got was the script that was shot. There was originally talk of Danny Boyle, who did Trainspotting, directing it. Again, a great choice, great idea. And we met with him and his producer. I don't know what the circumstances were and why he opted not to do it, but then Jean-Pierre Jeunet came in, and we hit it off with him immediately. He's such a great visual storyteller, and he appreciates everything that we do, and he's an artist, so he loves the sculpture and the design aspects of all this stuff, and we just had a terrific working relationship with him.
From an effects point of view, it sounded huge what they were trying to do, and it was shortly thereafter that we met Jean-Pierre Jeunet, and just immediately had a real strong feeling that this is a guy that could pull this off. From having seen Delicatessen was the only film I was familiar with at the time that he had done, and knowing that he has such a specific visual style. And I think that's what the studio was so excited about, having him involved. It was going to be a whole different take, on the Alien series, to go in with that kind of vision as opposed to what had been done before.
When I first heard that Jean-Pierre had been brought onto the project, I was kind of surprised, because the lineage of the Aliens, is such an illustrious, group of people, from Ridley Scott to James Cameron to David Fincher. And so, my first thought was, well, who is this Jean-Pierre Jeunet guy? And then, of course, having seen City of Lost Children, I kind of put that issue to rest, because certainly one of the strongest visualists I've ever seen.
When you look at his films, you really come to understand that he is one of the few directors that has a real unusual point of view and a different eye. It's like he has a third eye, and he sees things visually very differently than other people. And he will take something, put a spin on it, then put a spin on that. And I think there's a quality of uniqueness about his vision that doesn't exist with a lot of directors.
I could tell from his pictures that if he wanted to do it, if he had a passion about the Alien movies, that he would be great, because he had a lot of the qualities I think you need. I mean, I have a very peculiar slant on what I think you need to direct these pictures, and I thought he'd be terrific.
I remember I thought it's not a good idea to make sequels. And when they called me, I thought it's finished, the series finished now.
I actually had the interesting experience of meeting with him on the day he landed in Los Angeles. He hadn't had his first meeting with Fox yet. And I remember distinctly him saying, I have no idea why me,
At this time, I was writing Amélie. And when I went to the studio to meet the executive producer, the first thing I said, it was, why you want to hire me? I am busy. I don't want to make a Hollywood movie. And it was exactly the thing they wanted to hear,
He just couldn't understand what they'd seen in his films that made someone at Fox say, let's get this guy. But he was honored by it. He just couldn't understand it.
I think if they hired me, I suppose, and they told me, because I had some weird ideas, and they saw it in the City of Lost Children. I knew special effects and this kind of thing, but in first because I was able to bring some ideas. And in fact, I brought a lot of ideas, and they kept it, except when it was too expensive.
I mean, basically, I met him as he was getting off the plane. He said, we need to talk again in a few days after I know if I've got the job or not. And when I spoke to him maybe a week later or something like that, at that point he started talking about his understanding of the Fox agenda. But what was more important to him, I think, was his own. And I think his agenda was, for me, this is exactly the same as taking on a commercial, except it's going to be a very long one. But what he meant by that is that he was completely willing to come in as a hired hand whose talent was obviously respected by Fox. But I think he understood his job to really be helping the studio do exactly what they had in mind for the franchise. And it was clear in his mind. He was like, we're going to listen to what they want. They're going to tell us whom they want. And they already knew by that time that Sigourney Weaver and Winona Ryder were in the film. It was presumably part of some package, at least prior to Jean-Pierre being on the film. And I think they already had a script written, which was very close to the script that we ended up working on.
It was so an amazing adventure to make a big Hollywood movie. And Alien, it's a nice series. I couldn't say no, I remember.
He really wanted to be part of the game. He didn't want to be an outsider.
The cliché in France is when you work in Hollywood, you are not free. And in fact, the first surprise for me, I was free in terms of artistic direction. And in terms of money, it was exactly the opposite. They wanted to keep in further schedule and to save money. And I can understand because, you know, this kind of movie could be so expensive with the huge sets, with everything. But I was free and they accept all the ideas. And I brought a lot of ideas. It was very important for me because it was the first time I didn't write the script myself.
Jean-Pierre and I spent some time refining the script and figuring out what the climax was going to look like. And of course, he brought his Jean-Pierre-ness to it. But we didn't alter it much.
Everything worked except the ending. It was a big problem with the ending. We wrote maybe 5 different endings.
We really just took out the things that are too expensive to shoot, which I tend to write occasionally.
During the storyboard, because I made a very nice storyboard, it was a role of the game for me to bring one idea per scene, and I did.
Jean-Pierre, when I first met him, was extremely charming and seemed very creative and artistic and eccentric and very, very French, which was rather, it was in Los Angeles, so it was very refreshing. There was a slight conflict with his Frenchness and his creativity clashing with, you know, the hard-boiled Hollywood machine, and that did cause problems on the film. But on the whole, he was an extremely nice and charming man. I liked him a lot.
He basically had brought over some of his key players from France. He had Darius Khondji, who's a cinematographer who shot Seven at the time, and Stealing Beauty. He's a fantastic cinematographer. He'd brought his editor, Hervé Schneid, who had also worked on all of his movies. There was Pitoff, who's the special effects director, supervisor, I guess, from Dubois, with his whole French crew.
The deal with Fox and Jean-Pierre was to give to Jean-Pierre anything he needed to do his job and to be comfortable with his crew. And so that's why he asked me to come in LA. And then so I brought my people from Paris to do a big part of the visual effects.
For a cinematographer, it's a great thing to work with him. He's very exciting person to work with. He really appreciates really a lot the visuals. He creates a lot. He's like one of these very visual director, like Roman Polanski or Bernardo Bertolucci. He really appreciates the look of the film, the lighting. He appreciates the camera, the composition. He's very involved in it, and he's fun to work with. He's not somebody with. He's really great fun to work with.
I made 2 films with Darius Khondji before, and it's very like this. You know, it's not necessary to speak a lot with Darius.
He's one of those directors that knows exactly how we're going to shoot it. I mean, I don't bring much in terms of the choice of angles. He usually give it. You know, he give me an angle that he likes. This certain distance between the face, the actors and the camera, certain angle, a certain vision of the scene, and then he give it to me to fine tune it to make it, you know, better. And then he gives me the freedom on. Jean-Pierre always gives me a lot of freedom on lighting, on the creation of the mood.
He is the prince of darkness, Darius Khondji. He loves when it's very dark. And I thought, okay, it's pretty okay for this kind of movie because we don't want to see a lot the monsters.
One of the really school of lighting for me, one of the film with like The Conformist, Last Tango and 1900 movies like that. One of the film in the list of the film where I really learned a lot, I think, watching them all over and over again, once the DVD and tapes came out of these films, was Alien, the first Alien. For me, it's really like a, how do you say, milestone in horror films and also in design, in the way movies are designed and photographed.
What Jean-Pierre was about was his infinite respect for the art direction of the first Alien movie.
It was so new. The monster was so scaring. It was so a good idea to hire Giger for the monster. And it was new because the ship very old, with age, with you know, the dust and very not clean. It was pretty new.
He also wanted, that was one of his agendas, was to really match the savvy of typical Hollywood movies. I don't think he wanted to come to America to do a sort of Frenchy goes to Hollywood film. And one of the things he did as soon as he landed was rent a bunch of videotapes or DVDs or whatever people were watching at the time.
So we watched these things a lot with Jean-Pierre. Of course, we watch all the Aliens. I remember we were going to his house regularly and watching other movies or science fiction, or other science fiction movies, and especially the three first Alien that were all interesting for different reasons. Even though my really favorite one was the first one, which for me was really like a masterpiece.
And I remember he carefully watched a lot of those movies and counted the camera setups. And he even obtained production reports on some of these films, including on the first Alien, because I'll never forget that the actual camera setup count for Ridley's Alien was around 859 or 60 shots. Let's say maximum 900 setups, as opposed to something like a typical summer action movie back in 1996 had, I think, a head count around 1,600 setups or something to that extent. And he was very conscious of that and decided to really raise the amount of shots. He really, really wanted to match the rhythm and the sort of heightened tension that typical summer movies would have in America.
Wanted to see what was good, what was not as interesting in the first ones, and and how we could really make the whole thing, make an evolution, you know, create something, make the creature different, you know.
I think it was very important to keep the Giger style, and the studio didn't want to work with him for a question of money, I suppose, but for me it was very important to keep the style of Giger. And I said to the crew, I bought the book of Giger's and I gave them to all the crew.
Because it's the three movies were so strong, then you're sort of obliged to be in the same mood, because the mood is good. Anyway, the mood is very good, and Giger is really at the beginning of this. So Giger gave his sort of print on the Syria, and then when you're making a sequel like this, anyway, the character of the alien is so strong. Then I don't think there's a lot of different way to make it, and then you give your own sensibility on the character and the story. And when you are like Jean-Pierre with a very strong world and strong vision, then you make your own. But you're obliged to have in mind what the other guys did before.
So he took this way of, you know, like also the dark comedy, you know, almost, which was interesting, I think, for the fourth one.
I can't avoid humor because I love to do the humor, you know. And I was a little bit worried about that because I thought, is it okay in an alien movie? In fact, I called Marc Caro and I said, they asked me to make an alien, what do you think? And I suppose he didn't believe they are going to hire me, you know. And he told me, if I could be completely free, I am okay, but it's not the case, I don't care. Because, you know, he is very... And I understood he's not ready for Hollywood.
There was no distinction as to who did what. It's a little bit like the Wachowski brothers, you know. Nobody's actually sort of stopped the clock to say, okay, who did what? For a long time, people talked about Powell Pressburger without anybody knowing for sure how much Pressburger, you know, intervened. And I think Caro and Jeunet were a little bit like that. It was a sort of two-headed entity. And I got the sense that at the time that Jean-Pierre was offered the job, basically they were both offered the job. But I think Caro turned it down.
He's very radical. I love that about Caro, that he's extremely radical, and he constantly wants more in the look, in the design of it. He's very, very perfectionist to the obsession.
So I think they talked about it, and I think Caro said, why don't you go it alone on this one, because I don't think that they'll let me do my sort of turn-of-the-century Jules Verne style of art direction, and if I can't have that, I'm not really interested. Which was probably a good call. Chances are they didn't want that, you know. And Jean-Pierre said, fine. So he flew over to Los Angeles to meet the guys. But because they were buddies, he said, why don't you come out and still do some designs for me, which Caro did. He came out for about 3 weeks in June, I think, of '96, and did some paintings of costumes, which were then adapted into actual costume designs by the costume department.
When I actually really arrived on the preparation of the picture, there was some drawings, some inspiration, I think, for the costumes that were coming from Caro. But Caro is such an, really interesting, really like a genius of conceptual of design and things, you know. Caro is an amazing person for twisting things, for breaking things, making things like really things that you haven't seen, that makes it very exciting.
At the first meetings with Jean-Pierre, we talked about his concepts, his basic concepts for the movie. And he'd brought some drawings that he and his associate Marc Corot had done in Paris. They were very basic conceptual ideas, and he said, ignore these drawings, but I want you to see them so that you know how we've been thinking about it. And I did take some of the ideas from them, and then I invented a lot of my own. And although when the book of the making of the film came out, I wasn't mentioned, and Marc Corot was credited with everything, which did piss me off rather a lot.
Caro is a very big friend of mine, as Jean-Pierre, and I know them from the beginning. The first time I met Jean-Pierre was on the Harry. I was a Harry operator, and he came to see me for music videos because he has some problems with the face of the actress. He has some stuff to get rid of, so it was kind of funny. And Caro, I did all his short films and music videos and commercials, and yes, it's my family.
I mean, on the two first films that I did with Jean-Pierre, Delicatessen and City of Lost Children, the impact of Caro was huge in the mood.
He came to do some sketches for the costume, and during 2 weeks, but he doesn't drive, and he doesn't like sun. LA is a worse city for Marc Caro.
Caro knew that because he tended to have more of the sort of art direction responsibilities, and Jean-Pierre Jeunet had more of the director's responsibility, dealing with the actors, dealing with the actual framing of the shots, if you like. I think that Caro sort of knew that he would have a very hard time working in an American studio environment. And that's sort of a reaction that you'd get out of most typical French, filmmakers or would-be filmmakers, is they like, it's a pride issue. I think they like to act as if they're very suspicious of the American studio system, as if they've got it figured out or something. And I think he just didn't want to be part of it. He just didn't want to have the sort of size, the bigness of what his idea of an American studio is hovering over him. Whereas Jean-Pierre welcomed the opportunity because he's trained as a commercial director, and he's got that whole part of his personality licked, and he had it for a long time. He knows how to be very efficient and how to be a good businessman where needed, and for him that wasn't a problem.
Maybe because from the beginning I wanted to stay friend with the studio. I wanted to stay positive, and I did. And now I am friend with Tom Rothman, Roy Saragi, and Peter Rice and Bill Mechanic. I stayed friend with them, and it was a very nice adventure. It wasn't easy every day because, you know, in first they want to keep the schedule and to save money, as I said. But it's a strange game because they push you to save money, and on the other hand, they are very happy when they have the quality. And it's a strange game. Sometimes you have to fight, to struggle against the studio, for the studio. It's weird, but that's Hollywood, I suppose.
Oddly enough, that whole experience sort of showed Jean-Pierre who he was in their relationship, and showed Caro who Jean-Marc Caro was in that relationship. And although I think they still meet on a regular basis, I'm not convinced that they actually will ever work together again.
I would have loved to have more input of Caro, but we had also a great production designer that we discovered on this film, which Nigel Phelps, who was one of the best news of the film. It was the first time I worked with Nigel, and I think he did an incredible work of design of the spaceship, of the hallways, the way it was all designed.
Nigel had worked carefully with Darius Khondji in designing the film, so that the lighting was integrated into the set. And basically every design Nigel was doing was intending to give opportunities for actual practical lights to be fitted into the set beneath little layers and grids and little holes that created rhythms of light, so that when you actually walked through the set lit, it was already lit for the film. There's nothing to do. You just walk through, and Darius had already worked out with Nigel exactly where the lights were going.
Basically, we did a lot of research looking at films, and then we had a lot of meetings. At the same time, we had meetings all the way along with Nigel and Jean-Pierre, the three of us. Especially the three of us were thinking about how we would design things, how we would make an evolution of the tension on the film, with the lights, with the practical lights, with all the siren lights, the red, how do you say, the like police lights, with searchlights, with things like this. And we made a big, like a big preparation on this.
Nigel came up with very complex sets. They were very, like Chinese puzzles, the spaceships and everything, although they were slotted together.
At the time, I think Nigel had done Judge Dredd, and I think Fox went to Jean-Pierre and said, "We'd like you to look at some of the people we're thinking about." So when I said Nigel had done Judge Dredd, that's what he'd done as a production designer, but he'd actually worked for many years as Anton Furst's assistant. And as such, he'd worked on movies like Full Metal Jacket and Batman.
Nigel Phelps, I met this guy, he's so close to me. When he brought me the first sketches, it was for Batman, I think. And it was exactly a kind of continuity of the harbor of the City of Children. And I had a very good relationship with him, and Sylvain Desprez was one of the crew of Nigel.
Fox was apparently hugely proud of their set because they used to just wheel everyone through that area. It just would bring everybody, stars, people they were trying to impress, God knows who. People were just constantly walking through and just admiring, and it was beautiful. You had to scratch the paint off the walls to accept that it wasn't rusted metal. I mean, every detail, every bolt. This is the way Nigel works. It's like everything was meticulously looked at. The sets were built a few stages apart from one another at Fox in America.
I remember it was pretty difficult to find some stages, but at this time, no question, it was Los Angeles.
They didn't shoot it in England because I think Sigourney Weaver didn't want to travel. It was as simple as that. She lives in New York. I think she wanted to go to Los Angeles for the period of the shoot, which was maybe October, November through February of the following year, something like that. And she didn't want to be too far away. So everybody basically decided to shoot the film in LA.
All the pictures have been really hard to do. They've all been rough, really hard on the crews. In England especially, where we always did them, we worked till like 11 o'clock every night, and we worked Saturdays, and it was really lousy. We made good movies, but I don't like to see the crew exhausted. I think it's dangerous for this kind of movie.
It was difficult to find empty stages, because available stages, because it was a lot of big movies at this time, Starship Troopers and The Lost World, if I remember, and Titanic, and a lot of films. And I remember it was a funny story. The Fox studio weren't available because the wife of Robert Murdoch wanted to make a charity sale in a stage. And at the end we got the stages. And I was very happy because I didn't want to shoot in bad in location. I prefer to shoot at Fox. Even it was a construction site at this time. I was very proud to shoot at Fox. I remember each morning when I passed the gate, I was so proud.